Everybody likes a varnished piece of wood, right? Well, getting that finish with a traditional system such as a single part varnish can take a really long time, building up volume and waiting for things to dry before you can get that final deep gloss finish. With this project, I wanted to see just how quickly I could turn that around and push the boundaries of that using modern alternative products. So in this video, we're going to take a look at how we can get this full deep gloss varnish system in just 3 days. Seeing as we're in such a rush, let's get going on the video. So we're starting out the application with an epoxy resin, and I'm using West System epoxy for that. I'm using the 105 resin mixed with the 207 Special Clear hardener. The Special Clear hardener is a really nice one to use in instances like this where you don't want to alter the coloration of the surface. And in this case, I've got those inlaid deck lines and I don't really want to change the look of those in comparison to the planking. So I'm mixing these two products in a 3:1 ratio. I'm doing that using a graduated mixing cup. So you can see here we've got 3 parts of the resin and we've got 1 part of the 207 hardener. We want to mix the two of those really thoroughly, stirring them for at least a minute in a little pot of this sort of size and go around the outside of the pot to make sure that there's no unmixed product left around the edges. Give that a really good mix and then we're on to application. So I always apply the first coat with brush. Just allows me to really work that into the surface and make sure that I'm fully coating every face that I need to get to, particularly on an item that is a little bit detailed such as this one. So you want to make sure that you're brushing that in a couple of different directions, get it really nicely worked into the wood grain, and then finish it up with a tipping pass in the direction of the wood grain. That's just going to start to burst some of those bubbles that you get from the off-gassing process of the resin. As the resin soaks into the wood, the air that is within that wood grain that the epoxy is replacing starts to come out, and that's what happens with off-gassing. Because the epoxy resin is a really thick product, it tends to hold bubbles in the surface. So you need to make sure that you tip this several times to get those properly burst. Then I'm going to let that first coat of epoxy resin set up, and it wants to be around about sellotape tacky. So the surface needs to be dried until it's about as tacky as a piece of sellotape. Then we can go straight on with the second coat, nothing done in between. So the second coat, you can see I'm doing mostly with a roller here. So I'm rolling that out and then I'm going to be tipping it with a brush. Just again, to get those off-gassing bubbles popped and any bubbles that are left over from the rolling process. Because the resin is quite a thick product in comparison to a varnish where these bubbles would normally pop of their own accord, they need a little bit of extra help with the epoxy resin. So just tip that out with a brush and then we get a nice smooth finish. So we're doing 3 coats in total, and this is all within the first day of the process. So again, we wait for that second coat to get up to the sellotape tacky stage, and then we roll another one straight on top of it. And then you can see here, this is a really good example of what you get within the surface of the epoxy. The sort of milkiness to the surface are some tiny little bubbles that are left over from the rolling process. And you can see that as I tip those out here with the brush, we're just bursting those little bubbles, releasing the air from the surface, and you can see that we're starting to lose that milky finish to the epoxy. You may need to tip the surface 2 or 3 times to get rid of all of those. So at the end of the first day, we've got 3 coats of the epoxy applied. We leave that to cure overnight, and then we're on to the next stage of the process on the second day. You can see that we're not aiming for a perfect finish here. We don't need to worry too much about little bits in the surface. We don't need to worry too much about bubbles in the surface or too much texture. The idea here is to get a really good coating, which is going to offer that base layer protection for the wood underneath. So day 2, the epoxy is cured nice and hard, and we're looking to just knock that back and take the top of the surface off. We're not aiming to sand back too far or too hard at this stage. What we certainly don't want to be doing is breaking through to the bare wood at any point around the part. We want to make sure that we keep that nice protective layer that we've put in place by the epoxy. So you can see here that we've got some low spots, and they're indicated by the shiny areas that are left. The real aim with this sanding process is just to break the tops of any bubbles that may still be left in the surface, just to denib any little bits that might have settled in that. And then once we finish that on all faces, I'm just going to go over that with a Scotch-Brite pad, and what that does is that then scratches up the lower portions of the surface that are still remaining. So we want this nice dull white finish to the whole surface, and then we are ready to move on to the next stage of the process. So once everything's adequately keyed up, we're going to just hoover all of the surface dust off the part. Then we're going to wipe down with some thinners, which is just going to make sure we've got a nice, clean, degreased surface there. Then we're on to application of the next product. So the next product we're going to use here is made by Epifanes, and that is a product called PP. This is a high build 2-part clear system, and it is effectively like your primer filler for varnish work. Really nice product that builds good volume very quickly and also flats back very nice and quickly the next day following on from application. So you will note that I'm spraying this product on here. Now the benefit of spraying, of course, is not so much finish like everybody thinks it is, but it's really speed of application. In this particular instance, that allows me to apply several coats all in one day. The Epifanes PP can be sprayed wet on wet, providing that you leave enough time in between coats for the solvents to fully evaporate. So I'm leaving around about an hour to 2 hours between coats here before I go and spray the consecutive coat straight on top of the surface. The idea here is that we're going to build volume very quickly. So we're going to do 5 coats of this on the second day. Now, I appreciate that if you guys are doing this finish at home, you may well not have access to spray facilities, and spray isn't going to be an option. That's not a problem at all. You can still follow the exact same process with this product by using brush and roller techniques for application. The only difference between that and the spray application is that you are going to create a little bit more texture in the surface, because when you roll this product on top of a freshly applied coat, even if you leave it long enough for the solvents to evaporate, because you're physically touching that surface, what you're going to do is slightly disturb the first coat that you applied. So the only difference that you're really going to see is that you'll have a slightly worse finish as you progress through the wet on wet coats with this product. With spray, obviously you're laying that product down without physically touching the surface, and therefore you can get a much better finish when you're building multiple coats in one hit. Day 3 then, and we're starting the preparation of the Epifanes PP product. What we're looking to get done at this stage is to get our surface perfectly flat and prepared for our final top coats. So you can see here that as I'm running the sander across the surface, we've got some low spots that are left over from the texture that is being created through the building of volume. So what we need to do is to continue to sand the surface until it is flat. So we want to get 100% smooth surface here. We want to get rid of all those low spots. So we keep going over that until all of those are removed. At this stage, if you are sanding so much that you end up breaking through to the bare wood, it basically means that you haven't got enough product on there and you're going to have to go back a stage. You can see here how by reading the surface of what we've got, that we can see what's going on. So there's a little slump there where I've had some run of product coming down off that vertical surface, and as soon as we start to sand that back, you'll see that illustrated. Areas that are not doable by DA should be done by hand, and you can see that I'm doing the side of this part here with a little flat block. And again, this starts to illustrate what's going on the surface. So you can see with the first run of the block over the surface, you're taking off the tops of the high spots. And looking down the side of it here, you can see we've got unsanded, we've got just lightly skimmed, we've got slightly flatted back with some low spots still, and then we've got perfectly flat. And perfectly flat is what we're looking to aim for across the whole of this surface. So we're getting that all over, and then we're just finishing up with the Scotch-Brite just to give that a nice uniform finish all over and do any of the corners that might be a little bit too risky to do with some sandpaper. Then we give that surface a hoover off again and a wipe down with thinners to clean and degrease the surface, ready for the final top coats. Here we can see a mark in the surface that is a really good identifier for what is going on. When you get these little white patches appear in the surface doing a process like this, they're an indication that you've hit a different product. So what that is highlighting is the fact that I've gone through to a slightly different product. So those couple of little patches, that's where I've gone through to the epoxy. Those should be your real red flag to say stop sanding in that area, because the next stage is going to be going through to bare wood, and you really don't want to be doing that. At this stage in the process, having a little patch that's gone through to the epoxy is absolutely fine. We don't want to be through to bare wood, but the epoxy is okay. So that's just a little warning sign that you can pick up for knowing that you're getting a little bit too close. Then we're on to application of the top coats. So we're using the Epifanes Pure Clear Polyurethane Gloss Top Coat for this. This is a product that needs to be mixed in a 2:1 ratio But this product is done by weight rather than volume, as we did with the epoxy first of all. So we're doing that using some scales, and we're doing 2 parts of the varnish to 1 part of hardener. Again, we want to mix that nice and thoroughly, just giving that cup a little scrape around the outside to make sure that we've not got any product that is unmixed left around the edge of that. Now once this product is mixed, it needs to sit in the cup for around about 15 minutes before you start application. That is the perfect opportunity that I find to just go back to the part again, have another look around it, go over it again with a tack cloth, make sure that there's no dust settled in the surface, and just give it a final once check over before you get on to applying your top coats. What you can see I'm doing here is I'm thinning this by 20% with Epifanes Polyurethane spray thinner. That is obviously because I'm spraying the finish. If you're not spraying the finish, you don't need to be thinning at this stage. You can just apply it straight as it is out of the can. So what you want to be doing here is at least 3 of these final top coats, and that is going to give you your nice gloss level and your UV protection for the layers that are underneath this top coat. So as you can see, I'm spraying this finish again, and you can also do this with brush and roller. As I mentioned earlier, that's going to have a slight difference in the finish that it's going to get you. So realistically, what you would probably have to do is your 2 coats on one day. So you do 2 consecutive coats with your window in between, allowing the solvents to evaporate. I would probably recommend that for your final coat, you do 1 last sand just to get that surface back nice and flat, and then you apply your final top coat. So that's actually going to take you 4 days if you're doing this with brush and roller. Because I'm doing this with spray, as I mentioned earlier, I'm able to lay those coats on top of each other, wet on wet, without disturbing the coat before it. That is going to allow me to get a better finish quicker because I'm not physically touching the surface. So there we go, 3 top coats applied. As with all of the Epifanes products, you get a beautiful flow out of these. So in the hour following application, they just continue to get better as they flow out until you've got a really nice finish, which is what we're looking at now. So I hope you found the video informative. Let me know in the comments below if you're going to be using this process on some things. It'd be perfect for tables. Obviously it's good for boats, which is what I'm doing. Anything you want to get a deep high gloss finish on, it's a really nice, fast, modern process, and I'm using this kind of process more and more these days. So obviously in this video I've done a bit of a quick kind of run through of the process. If this is something that you'd be interested in learning in more depth and at a slower pace with much more detail, then check out my varnishing course. This is going to form the new bonus module that I'm adding on to the end of the varnishing course, where we look entirely at really fast, modern 2-part clear systems and how to apply them. So if you guys want to learn more, check that out. If not, just use this as your guide and get cracking with some shiny finishes. Hope you enjoyed it. Catch you in the next video. Cheers.